In this video, we're looking at possibly the most aggressive opening for white, the fried liver attack, with the 10 best games ever played in this opening. Our hero in the first game is Paul Morphy, and he starts e4. Black's e5 is met by knight f3 attacking the pawn, so knight c6 defends. Bishop c4 is the Italian game, to which black replies knight f6, the two knights defense. The knight blocks the queen's vision of g5, however, so the white knight jumps to g5, coordinating with its bishop on the soft f7 square. Black's only way to block the attack is d5, and after white takes the pawn, black recaptures with the knight. Morphy unleashes the fried liver attack with knight takes f7. In the fried liver attack, white sacrifices the knight to build a potent attack on black's king. To avoid loss of material, black takes the knight, putting his king at the end of a pin. White jumps his queen to f3, hitting both the king and the pinned knight. The only way to save the knight, while dealing with the check, is king e6, which is what black plays, walking the king into the heat of a wild central battle. Morphy develops his knight with a tempo on the black knight, and black drops his other knight back to e7 defending. White castles, bringing his rook into the game, and black reinforces his knight with c6. Next, white lunges with d4 in an attempt to break open the center. Black can't really do much to stop it, and rook e1 is coming to add even more pressure to the pawn. Black just takes white's pawn, and white swiftly shifts his rook a square to give check. The king dodges to d7, and white is able to win a pawn by taking the knight on d4. This leads to an exchange of knights, the bishop taking black's second knight, and after black takes back, white grabs the free pawn with his queen while giving check. Now black could block with the bishop, but he doesn't want to put himself into a pin, so he runs his king to c7. White activates his bishop with a check, and black's best bet here is to block with the queen, because if you didn't notice, white started this game without a rook, so giving back the queen for a bishop and a rook isn't the end of the world. Instead, black plays bishop d6, digging his own grave, as white has a wonderful winning combination. Can you find white's checkmate in 3? To find the move, you need to notice that the bishop is pinned to the king and short on defenders. The move Morphy plays to exploit this is queen c5 check. Black has two options. King d7 loses on the spot because white would take the bishop with checkmate. So black moves the king to b8, after which white takes the bishop, giving up his queen, and after black takes it, white recaptures with his bishop, who delivers checkmate. The next fried liver attacker is Wilhelm Steinitz, and like in the last game, black takes the knight with his king, and after queen f3 forking the king and the knight, black advances his king to e6 to defend. White's knight f3 attacking the black knight is met by knight e7 defending, before white immediately lunges in the center with d4. With this move, white opens up his bishop, while also wanting to open up the center. And were black to take the pawn, white could quickly develop his pieces while getting his rooks into the game, and maybe even sacrifice a second piece. Black doesn't take the pawn, maintaining the tension with c6 to secure his knight, and white plays bishop g5, pinning the other knight to its queen. Black gets his queen out of the way, moving her to d6, and white castles kingside. Black's queen b4 attacks the bishop and the pawn, so white drops his bishop back to b3, saving both. Then black plays a6, asking the question to the white bishop, who captures the knight. And here black should really recapture with his king, getting it away from the center. But instead, he recaptures with the bishop, and it's more or less over for him already. Steinitz grabs the knight on d5, hitting the queen and threatening all sorts of discovered checks on the king, which means black has no choice but to recapture. White grabs the pawn with his queen, giving the king only a couple of options, neither of which are very appealing. Black shifts his king to f6, and after white's queen f7, the king gets pushed further forward. White hits it again with h4, and black could take the pawn, which would delay the inevitable checkmate just a few moves. but he instead advances his king to g4, giving white a slightly faster way to win. Can you find white's checkmate in 4? Black's king, deep within white territory, is running out of squares, and all white has to do is gradually confine him even more. The move Steinitz starts with is queen f3 check. Black resigns the game at this point, but his only move would be king takes h4. White would carry on with queen g3 check, pushing the king to h5. Then, bishop f7 check would force black to block with g6, after which bishop takes g6 would be checkmate. Our third player is John Cochrane, and this game follows a similar path as the first two, with the king being lured towards the center to defend the knight. White attacks it with his knight, and black defends it with his, before white strikes in the center with d4. Black reinforces his knight with c6, and white brings his bishop to g5, pinning the other knight to its queen. Unlike last game, black goes for the immediate h6, hitting the bishop, and white snatches the knight on e7. Black recaptures with his bishop, and white castles queenside, getting his king to safety, while activating his rook in the center. Black swings his rook over to f8, hitting white's queen, who jumps to e4, threatening the pawn on e5. Now black could try defending it, but there's really no point, because white's primary purpose is not to win the pawn, but to open the d-file. Instead, black goes for rook f4, which induces white to capture the pawn with his queen instead of his pawn. The problem for black, however, is that with the pawn gone and the knight pinned to the king, the rook is now hanging. Were the king to go to f7, white would just pick it up for free. So the king goes to d7, and white wins the knight on d5, going up material, namely 2 pawns, along with a dominant position. The reason I say white wins the knight is because black absolutely can't take back the knight. But in the game he does, giving white a way to finish things up right away. Can you find white's checkmate in 1? The black king, surrounded by his own pieces and cut off by the enemy queen, only has one diagonal left to work with. But white can take that away, and the move Cochrane plays to do that is bishop b5 checkmate. Our fourth competitor is Gioacchino Greco, and this game follows the same pattern as the previous one. White builds up pressure on the d5 square, and black defends it. This time, however, white delays interactions in the center, first castling. After black secures his knight with c6, white shifts his rook to e1, and now it's difficult for black to find a good move. He develops his bishop to d7 because it's the only minor piece that he can move, but it also blocks the queen's defense of the knight. White thrusts forward with d4, and black has no way to defend the pawn that is also pinned. He starts running his king away. White takes the pawn with his rook, and black jumps his knight to g6, attacking it. White ignores the attack, taking the knight on d5, and black greedily grabs the rook before it has time to run away. But this hunt for material by black will prove to be his downfall. White takes the knight with check. Were black to take the pawn, then white would have a checkmate in 4, starting with queen f4. The king would be forced to e6, where he would get checked by the knight on c7, pushing the king to e7. White's queen e5 check would force the black bishop to block, which white would then take with checkmate. Back to the game. Instead of this, the king marches to c5, which is really no better. Greco swings his queen over to a3, allowing black to take the bishop. But with the black king on the wrong half of the board, it's no surprise that checkmate is only a couple moves away. Can you find white's checkmate in 2? The white pawn covers d6, and the knight covers b6 and b4. Were the black king on c5, then there would just be 4 more squares to cover for it to be checkmate. The move Greco plays to take 3 of them away is queen d3 check. The black king is forced to c5, and white delivers a pretty pawn checkmate with b4. Candidate Master Kumar Ghosh has the white pieces for the 5th game, and we proceed through the opening moves where black ties himself up into a perilous pin at the dead center of the board. This time black advances his other knight to defend, while keeping the option open for a counterattack. White castles his king, avoiding any funny business with the forks, and once black defends his knight with c6, white drops his bishop to defend his pawn. Black's bishop c5 developing is met by a3, kicking the knight back to a6. White continues with knight e4, hitting the bishop, who retreats to e7, before white follows up with another blow of c4. This time black advances his piece. Then white charges through with d4, not only undermining the knight, but trying to bust open the center to get at the enemy king. Black maintains the tension, sliding his rook over to f8, where it peers the white queen. White doesn't mind, however, as he grabs the pawn. Black drops his knight, opening a discovered attack on the queen, and white hits right back with a discovered attack of his own, c5, opening the bishop's gaze onto the king. Black's temerarious king continues its march forward as the white queen shifts a square, threatening all sorts of discovered checks. To avoid this, black sidesteps his king out of danger, but really he was toast to begin with. White has a winning combination here. Can you find the checkmate in 4? White's plan will involve pushing the black king to the brink, where he will have no more squares to run to. The move white starts with is knight g3 check. Black has two options. King f6 would lead to an immediate end after queen g5 checkmate. So instead, black goes for king to g4. White drops his queen a square, giving check, while getting alongside his sidekick bishop. In the game, black immediately goes to h4 with his king, but he could have delayed things a move with rook f3. The result would be the same after white would take it with his queen, forcing the king to h4. After that, queen h5 would be checkmate. The 6th player to take the stage is Alexander Tikhnenko, and like the last game, black advances his knight to b4 in order to defend his pinned knight. White castles his king to safety, and after black secures his knight with c6, white thrusts forward with d4. With his knight well defended, black takes the pawn on c2, hitting the rook. White just ignores this, taking on e5, slowly opening the center. Black greedily grabs the rook, and white slides his rook over to d1, pinning and preparing to capture the knight on d5. Here black goes a little cuckoo, capturing the pawn on e5 with his king. White follows through with his plan, capturing the knight on d5. Black counters with bishop g4, but unfortunately for him, it's all over for black here. White can win in just a few moves. Can you find the checkmate in 3? White just has so many pieces that can all play a role in delivering checkmate. The move white starts with is queen f4 check. This forces the black king to e6, where he gets double checked after the knight moves to c7. This pushes the king to e7, and the finishing blow is queen g5 checkmate. Chessmaster Andre Steiner takes the board for game 7, and like the previous 2 games, black defends his pinned knight with knight b4. Unlike the other 2 games, white goes for a3, enticing black to capture the pawn on c2 with check. White shifts his king to d1 before black grabs the rook in the corner. In return, white gets to take the knight on d5 while threatening dangerous discovered checks. So black sidesteps his king to d4, d6. Then white strikes with d4. Black, afraid of the consequences of white's capture, captures the pawn himself. White uses the open diagonal with bishop f4 check. Now, were the black king to back up, then not only would he lock in his queenside pieces, white's rook e1 would cut off a lot of the king's options, and black's king would be in trouble. So, black advances his king to c5, where he still has some hope of fleeing towards the queen side. The bishop is under attack, so white drops it to a1. a2, and black plays a5, giving his king the escape route it's looking for. Then white snatches the pawn on c7, kicking the queen to d7, before he lifts his king to d2, attacking the knight, while opening up the lane for the rook to swing over to c1. Black saves his knight, but white moves his rook to c1, pinning it to the king. Black saves the knight with pawn to d3, but despite being up a full rook, black is completely lost, as white has a way to win the game in short order. Can you find white's checkmate in 3? Now queen e3 is also a checkmate in 3 here, and I'll let you solve that one on your own. In the game, white plays a different move, and the idea is to get the d3 pawn to move. The move white plays to do this is the rook sacrifice, rook takes c2 check. Now black has 3 options. King d4 leads to an immediate checkmate after queen takes d3. And not taking the rook with king to b5 would see queen takes d3, pushing the king to a4, after which queen b3 would be checkmate. Instead of both of these, black takes the rook. This opens the lane for the queen to swing over to c3 with check, pushing the king to b5. The coup de grace is queen c4 checkmate. Grandmaster Sergei Zhigalko employs the fried liver attack in the 8th game, and to defend his knight, black drops his other knight to e7. White castles, and black plays c6, securing his knight even more before white strikes with d4. The king starts running away from the center, and black pins the other knight to the queen with bishop g5. Black defends his knight with bishop e6, and white shifts his rook over to e1, building up pressure on black's center. Black releases the tension, capturing the pawn, and white's knight leaps to e4 with check. The king runs to c7, where he gets hit again by the white queen on g3. King c8 could get dangerous after knight d6 and a rook sacrifice on e6. Let's show that line. After knight d6 and a rook sacrifice on e6. Now I won't go through all of it, but just believe me that it gets dangerous. So black avoids this, moving his king to b6. White's queen checks again on b3, and the king goes to c7. The players repeat moves once before white slots his knight into d6, opening a discovered attack on the black bishop. Black defends it with queen d7. White advances on the queen side with a4, but black puts a stop to that with a5. Then white jumps his queen to e5, adding another attacker to the bishop, and black gives it up, jumping his knight to g6. Now black's already up a piece, so he doesn't mind giving one back in order to exchange queens and put a stop to white's attack. Zhigalko absolutely doesn't want his attack to end, as he swipes the pawn on d4 with check. Black blocks with c5, pushing the queen back to d3. But with white's queen having left her post on e5, the knight is hanging, and black goes up a second piece, grabbing it with his queen. White swings his rook over from a to d1, creating a battery that pins black's knight to its queen. Black counters with h6. Now were white to take on d5, then he would eventually have to exchange queens. Instead, he takes the bishop with his rook, forcing the queen to recapture. Then he takes the knight with his bishop, getting 2 pieces for the rook. Now black's queen doesn't have many options, and the only square she can go to that keeps the game in the balance is d7. We'll see exactly why shortly, but instead she goes to d6, giving white a way to win the game. Can you find the checkmate in 2? Now the reason the queen had to go to d7 was to defend both the b5 square and the b7 square. First, let's cover why b5. Well, if the queen had instead gone to c8, defending only b7, then white's queen would jump to b5, giving check. Were the king to go to a7, then white would have this nice bishop takes b7 move, which is threatening just about everything. And were the queen to take it, then white would take on a5, leading to a checkmate after rook to d8, and the queen would have to block, allowing queen b6 checkmate. Otherwise, in this position, the king could go to c7, after which white would have the stunning bishop d8. The king can't take it because it would allow a devastating discovered check. So the king would have to move. Then white would take on b7 with his bishop. After the queen would take, white would play bishop c7 check, and the king going to a7 would lead to a checkmate by way of bishop b6, king b8, and rook d8 checkmate. Otherwise, taking the bishop here would run into rook d7, which would also lead to a checkmate. Back to the game. The reason the queen also has to defend b7 is much more straightforward. The move Jigalko plays to exploit black's slip-up is queen b3 check, pushing the king to a7, after which queen takes b7 is checkmate. In the penultimate game, Ansel Schiffer has the white pieces, and after black takes the fried liver knight and white plays queen f3 check, black does the cautious thing, retreating his king back to e8. This gives back the knight, which white takes, while also emerging up one pawn. Black lifts his queen to d7, defending the f7 square from white's pieces, before white grabs the knight, severely damaging black's pawn structure after he recaptures. White castles, and black brings his bishop to d6. White proceeds development with knight c3, before black goes ballistic with g5. White takes advantage of black's extended pawns, giving check on a5, since black can't block it with a pawn anymore. After the king sidesteps the square, white remains patient, playing d3 to open his bishop instead of immediately taking the free pawn. Black advances it to safety on g4, and white advances his knight into the action. Black plays queen f5, offering an exchange of queens, which white obviously declines. With black's king in such a suspicious spot, white moves the queen to h6, giving check. The king jumps to e7, and bishop g5 gives another check that pushes him to f7. Then white pushes f4, pretty much guaranteeing that the f-file will open up, and with that will come severe consequences. Black nervously runs his king away before white takes on e5, opening his rook that attacks the black queen. She takes back on e5, and white grabs the bishop, giving check. Now taking the knight with the pawn leads to queen h5 check, pushing the king to d7, after which queen f7 would force black's queen to block, at which point she would be taken with checkmate. Another option would be taking the knight with the queen, but after white's rook a to e1, black would be dead lost. The king going to d7 would lead to a similar checkmate as the other line, which means black would have to give up the bishop to block the check before losing the queen as well. Back to the game. Instead of both of these, black moves his king to d7, and white still has a really nice win. Can you find the checkmate in 3? With the white knight still around, along with the bishop and the queen, the black king has nowhere to go. All white has to do is give a check with a new piece, and the move he plays is rook f7. At this point, black resigns the game, but were he to play on, queen e7 would be the only defense. White would take that, which does block his bishop, meaning the king can go to d8. After which white would have a number of ways to end the game here, like rook takes h7 checkmate. John Cochrane makes a return for the final game, and after his opponent marches his king to the center of the board to defend his knight, and white plays knight c3 building up pressure on it, black drops his knight to e7 defending. White strikes with d4 to open the center, and black plays c6 securing his knight. Bishop g5 pins the other knight to the queen, and black plays h6 forcing the bishop's hand. It takes on e7, and black recaptures with his bishop before white castles queenside, getting his rook into the game right away as it peers the enemy queen. Black tries to build an attack of his own with b5, expanding on the queenside with a tempo. White takes the knight, and after black recaptures with the pawn, white takes on e5, opening the d-file for his rook. Black defends his pawn from its numerous attacks with bishop b7, but the b5 pawn is left up for grabs, and white takes it, racking up a total of 3 pawns for his sacrificed knight. black throws in bishop g5 check, pushing the king to b1, before he slides his rook over to f8, hitting the white queen. She skips to g4, giving a check, and the black king drops to e7, which is a mistake because it locks up his own bishop. White hauls out h4, trapping the piece, and black counters with bishop a6. White could save the knight, but he decides to grab the bishop instead in order to completely open up his rooks. Black takes the knight in return before white snatches the pawn on h6. Black can't even recapture because if he did, white would take with the rook and things would get bad real fast. White would be threatening queen e6 checkmate alongside several other checks. Now there are many lines here and I'll show one, but the idea is that black's king safety would be shameful. He could try queen d7, stopping the checkmate. White would move his queen to g5, pushing the king to e8, after which he would push e6, not only hitting the queen, but taking even more squares away from the enemy king. The queen would shift to c7, letting go of the pawn on d5, as the rook would take it, cutting off one side from the black king. Black wouldn't be able to do much to stop what's coming next, which would be queen g6 check, followed by king e7 and rook h7 check. Black would get checkmated shortly thereafter. Back to the game. So black doesn't take the pawn. Instead, he jumps his queen to a5, letting white take the pawn with an attack on the rook. Black swings it all the way over to c8, but white has an amazing way to win the game. Can you find how white can force checkmate? All white wants to do is get his pawn out of the way so that his major pieces can take full advantage of the open files and ranks near the enemy king. The move white plays to do that is promoting his pawn to a queen. This impels black to resign the game. It goes without question that black has no choice but to take the new queen, and with the pawn out of the way, white can jump his rook to the 7th rank with a check. The way for black to delay checkmate the longest is with king to f8, after which white could give any check with his queen on the f file to push the king to e8. Queen f7 check would come next, and the king would run to d8, where it would get checked by the final white piece after rook takes d5. The bishop could block, or the king would go to c8, but either way, checkmate would come on the next move. I hope these games were both entertaining and instructive. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chess content.